Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Walker with the Equine Medical Center. Here to talk to you today about the vaccinations that we recommend for horses. One of the most common questions I get asked by owners, both experienced owners and new owners, is what vaccines should they use on their horses. Through the years, we've sort of developed what we call our core vaccines, and that's just a set of vaccines that we think that every horse ought to get in our area. There are a lot of vaccines that aren't included in this, and that's because either the vaccine's not very effective or the disease is not found in our area very commonly. I tell people they should think of vaccines like an insurance policy. My family's lived in the same house that I live in since 1941. It's never burnt, but we've always had fire insurance. Of course, if you never buy the insurance and your house never burns down, you feel like you've saved some money. But if your house burns down or your horse burns down, you will wish you had some insurance. Most of the diseases that we include in our core vaccine program are diseases that are very serious to your horse, that can and frequently do cause death or very serious illness. So we'll first talk about what vaccines are covered in our core vaccine, and then talk about the frequency. Of course, the old standard Eastern and Western equine encephalitis, and those are abbreviated EEE and WEE. And we have tetanus, West Nile virus, rabies virus, and then we have flu, rhino, and strangles. So a little bit about these diseases. The Eastern and Western equine encephalitis and the West Nile virus are very similar diseases. They are carried by mosquitoes. So that means your horse doesn't have to go anywhere to get these diseases. Some of these respiratory diseases are a lot more common if you trailer your horse often or go to horse shows or intermix it with other horses, kind of like when your kids go to school. They stay healthy all summer and then they get sick within a month after school starting because they're mixed with all the others. Same with horses. Rabies, of course, is transmitted by rabid animals, coons, whatever. Rabies is something, there's two forms of rabies. There's what's called the furious form and the dumb form. Dogs typically get the furious form, so they act very aggressive and foaming at the mouth, and you're immediately warned that there's something going on and you should not get close to them. Livestock species like horses tend to get the dumb form more often, and that means that they just act sick. So the first thing you do is open up their mouth and look at their gums and get all around them, and if you happen to have a cut on your hand, like I frequently do, then you've been exposed to rabies. There is no cure for rabies, so I think of rabies in horses as something that I want to vaccinate to protect the owners as much as the horse. Tetanus and rabies. Tetanus is probably the most important, or most, if you only vaccinated your horse for one thing, it should probably be tetanus. Tetanus organism is found normally in horse feces, and of course horses are always associated with horse feces. And horses are the most susceptible livestock species we have to tetanus. So tetanus is a very common thing that we see, and it almost always results in death. And it's a cheap vaccine. Flu, rhino, strangles, these are respiratory vaccines. Typically they are less serious. Your horse probably won't die if they get one of these diseases, but it will result in a significant loss of use. So we're going to have the horse off for a period of a week or up to a month or two if they get strangles. Strangles also is exceptionally contagious, so if one horse in the barn gets it, every horse in the barn is going to get it unless they've been vaccinated. Strangles, I mean, horses can die of strangles. It's pretty rare. But like I said, you spend a lot of time and effort on your horses, and you want to be able to use them, and it never fails. They break with one of these diseases right at the peak of show season when you're wanting to get out and use them, or trail season. So the next question I get asked pretty often is how often then do we vaccinate for? And that brings about a discussion of a concept called titer. So when you give a vaccine to any animal, the immune system develops a response to that vaccine, and that's called we can measure that response in a titer. So that's the amount of antibodies that your body produces to fight off the disease in question. So if we draw a graph here, and this will be the amount of titer, how high the titer is, and this is time. If we draw a line here, this dashed line represents the level of titer that you have to have in order to not get the disease in question. So vaccine companies, when they're developing these vaccines, they will give them to experimental horses and then pull a titer, usually weekly, and see how that titer drops over time. That's a very expensive process. It's something that they might do on as few as 8 or 10 horses. And those 8 or 10 horses are going to give us our recommendations for what we think that a horse should be vaccinated. Every horse in the country should be vaccinated for. So if we first inject the vaccine, the titer very quickly within the first 5 to 7 days goes really, really high. And then over a period of time, that titer drops. Now theoretically, whenever this titer drops below this dashed line, that's the amount of time, that's the frequency at which we need to repeat the vaccine in order to continue protection. The vaccine companies for Eastern and Western, tetanus, West Nile, rabies, say that this period is 1 year. We do it more often than that. And one of the biggest reasons why is these are mosquito-borne diseases. And here in our area, we have 2 peaks of mosquito season. One in the early spring, and then one again in the early fall. When it starts to get, over our hot, dry summer, we don't have too much problem with mosquitoes, but when it gets wet again in the fall, particularly like it did this year, we have a big peak in mosquito season. So as you can see here, if we come out like typically most people historically give their vaccines in the spring, early spring, March is a good month to think about vaccines in our area. Then the mosquitoes come along in April, and you have a very high level of protection. Then this line drops over time. Theoretically, in the fall, we should still be above this line, but it coincides with a decreasing titer at the same time that we have a big increasing risk in exposure. And like I said, the vaccine companies may have used as few as 7 or 8 animals to determine this titer curve. And if you have a very young horse or a very old horse, they're just like people. Some people catch every sickness coming or going, and some people are very resistant. So if your horse happens to have a titer slightly lower at a time when it's getting highly exposed, we just feel like that this is cheap insurance. Back to the insurance analogy. So we recommend twice a year vaccines on everything on this list, really except for rabies. Rabies is an exceptionally good vaccine, and it probably lasts for longer than a year, but without drawing a titer, we don't really know exactly how long it lasts in every horse. It costs about $400 to draw a titer, so I don't get very many requests for that. The flu and rhino strangles, the vaccine companies themselves say that those only last for 6 months. Something that people need to understand is all vaccines are not created equal. I mean, some of them are really good, and it's not necessarily the vaccine, it's the disease that we're developing the vaccine for. So some diseases just don't lend themselves to a vaccine very well. Rhino is one of those examples. There's a lot of farms in Lexington that will vaccinate for rhino every 2 months, year round. And it's not necessarily a bad plan, especially if you're raising foals. But so we feel like if you do these vaccines twice a year, with the exception of rabies, we just do once a year, that you'll be very well covered for all of the diseases we find here. Now, there are several diseases that there are vaccines for. Botulism, Potomac horse fever are a couple of the more common that we don't really include on our core list, partially because the vaccines themselves are not great, the diseases are not very common, and but those are things that we can talk about on an individual basis when we visit your farm. So all of these vaccines are included in our wellness plan, and in the next segment we'll talk about floating teeth and parasite control, other things that are included in our wellness plan. Thank you.